Good afternoon. Thank you for taking this evening and spending it with the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm Anna Gremling, the Executive Director of the organization. What is the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization? That's a very good question. It's probably that governmental organization that you've never heard of. That's okay. We are actually founded in transportation planning, which is what you're going to hear about today, but we've actually branched out into several regional topics. So resiliency planning, economic development, land use, housing, anything of regional nature that is covering central Indiana, typically the IMPO is involved. We go as far north as Cicero, as far south as Franklin. On the west side, you got Danville to Greenfield. So quite a swath of central Indiana we cover, and we really try to have meaningful conversations. Typically, we try to fall within 4 pillars. We convene, inform, plan, and fund. So convene conversations, which we are today. Inform, if you don't know, the IMPO is very heavy in data. Demographic data, street count data, crashes, We do have a safety dashboard looking at serious and fatal crashes within the region. So convene, inform, plan. We are planning nerds at our core and our heart. And the last one is fund. Being founded in transportation planning, we are the designated entity that receives a portion of our federal gas tax back to the tune of about $55 million that we get to spend on infrastructure projects. And we do that year after year, working with our members. So with that, we have brought in Oboi Reed today to have a conversation. And I want to tell you a little bit about Oboi before I turn the microphone over to him. Equiticity is a racial equity movement operationalizing racial equity by harnessing collective power through, and they have 5, research, advocacy, programs, community mobility rituals, which I learned a little bit about today, in social enterprises to improve the lives of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. Equiticity's vision is for mid to large-sized U.S. cities where racial equity is fully integrated at the policy and legislative levels and into every function, department, resource, and budget associated with the city's operations, services, and programs. That's no small feat. Equiticity is working to help establish a U.S. city which serves as a global model for the rest of the world on showcasing how to normalize, prioritize, and operationalize a fully committed plan to racial equity, moving flow of resources, contributing to reducing violence, improving health, creating jobs, and ultimately making neighborhoods and cities more livable for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Oboi and have him talk today to you.
The founding president and CEO of the Equiticity Racial Equity Movement. We are operationalizing racial equity by harnessing our collective power through research, advocacy, programs, and community mobility rituals to improve our neighborhoods and improve the lives of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people in our society. We do community mobility rituals because they will have a potential to reduce violence in our neighborhoods. When there's a rhythmic frequency, that helps trust grow at the neighborhood level. When trust goes up in the neighborhood, the perception of violence goes down. When the perception of violence goes down, more people are willing to walk and bike and shop. And when our streets are more vibrant, we will have the potential of reducing violence in our neighborhoods. This is why we exist. This is why we work. This is why we ride.
New policies, new systems, new moves, reimagining
active transportation for racially marginalized communities. Hello, everyone. My name is Olatunji Oboi Reed. I am the founding president and CEO of the Equiticity racial equity movement. Here is my contact information in case anyone wants to get in touch with me. The presentation link and the QR code at the bottom of the slide will take you to this presentation, where you will be able to access the many links I refer to during my remarks. I would like to begin by offering a special thank you to Anna Grimley, Danielle, and Andrew, and the Indianapolis Metropolitan Planning Organization. I also want to say thank you to Toby, Drew, and Tool Design Group as well. I dearly appreciate our partnership on this event and all of the work over the past several months to bring this vision to fruition. I look forward to our continued work together into the future. Please note, after my remarks, we will have a facilitated Q&A, and we welcome your questions. As I am sharing remarks here, please feel free to think of any questions you all may want to ask. I would love for my remarks to be followed by a lively discussion with you all. I'm going to repeat some of what Anna said here. Equiticity is a racial equity movement operationalizing racial equity by harnessing our collective power through research, advocacy, programs, community mobility rituals, and social enterprises to improve the lives of Black, brown, and indigenous people in our society. Equiticity's vision is a mid to large size U.S. city where racial equity is fully integrated at the policy and legislative levels into every function, department, resource, and budget associated with the city's operations, services, and programs. We envision Equiticity creating a U.S. city which serves as a global model for the rest of the world on showcasing how to normalize, prioritize, and operationalize a full-throated, unflinching commitment to racial equity as an equitably moving flow of resources, contributing to reducing violence, improving health, creating jobs, and ultimately making our neighborhoods and our cities more livable for Black, brown, and indigenous people. Explicit in the vision for today's event and in the title of my talk, New Policies, New Systems, New Moves, Reimagining Active Transportation for Racially Marginalized Communities, is the acknowledgement with respect to cycling, walking, and transit that far too many of our communities, both here in Indianapolis and in cities across the country, are inequitable for racially marginalized people and in need of urgent transformation. Also, implicit in this event is the unfortunate reality that the systems, structures, and institutions which make up our society are the foremost purveyors of racialized inequities. We must all reckon with our individual and our institutional contributions to these inequities and the injustice experienced by racially marginalized people. We must also all reckon with these four fundamental truths. The root causes of all injustice experienced by racially marginalized people in our society are structural racism and racial capitalism. Our oppression was and is by design. The most important work we must do is the dismantling of structural racism and racial capitalism and the rebuilding of our society where Black, brown, and indigenous people thrive. Freedom is inevitable and is coming. Who are we serving and why? Are we primarily serving white, wealthy men who commute to work on their bikes and are part of the social mainstream in our society? Are we serving this community for pure profit motives? Are we intentionally serving racially marginalized people who feel compelled to own a car or use transit? Are we serving these communities to improve life outcomes? A one-size-fits-all model does not work in communities beset by inequities and injustice. Serving these communities requires specific strategies and tactics reflecting our unique identity, culture, history, and needs. Serving these communities also requires that you all see our humanity, imbued with the inherent God-given human right to live and prosper. I will now talk briefly about these strategies and tactics, namely what I refer to as new policies, new systems, and new moves. New policies represent institutional infrastructure which guides decision-making. New systems represent the products of this decision-making. New moves represent the results of our collective work. Let's start with new policies, focusing briefly on the first three listed here. The Equiticity Racial Equity Statement of Principles defines and envisions racial equity and describes the guiding principles which make up an unflinching and full-throated commitment to racial equity. This framework articulates an operational implementation of racial equity, which will be transformative for Black, brown, and indigenous communities. It's important that we define racial equity. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of question marks around what is racial equity. Here is our definition. Racial equity is the fair, just distribution of resources, explicitly targeting and prioritizing racially marginalized people as the groups who have the greatest needs due to being systematically disenfranchised, and using these resources to address both historical and contemporary injustices, and removing inequities and improving life outcomes. Racial equity is focused on Black, brown, and indigenous populations as the racially marginalized communities here in the United States. The next policy I want to talk about is the untokening's principles of mobility justice. This framework provides, this policy provides a framework which identifies a range of intersectional unsafeties and attacks which people from marginalized groups experience in public space, including streets, transit systems, and the institutions exerting control over these same spaces. Each principle explores the problem, a new vision, and suggested approaches advancing an alternative paradigm. Because definitions are important, I want to give a definition of mobility justice. Dr. Jesus Barajas, professor at the University of California, Davis, defines mobility justice as the fair distribution of resources and decision-making power that repairs historic harm and guarantees freedom of movement for marginalized and oppressed people. Mobility justice is focused on socially marginalized communities, including low to moderate income, non-English speaking, LGBTQ+, racialized people, the disabled community, and other groups not considered members of the social mainstream in U.S. society. The next policy I want to focus on is what's called the spectrum of community engagement to ownership, developed by Rosa Gonzalez of Facilitating Power. It explores a formal process for strengthening and transforming our democracy. Creating equitable communities is possible when our planning processes are owned by residents and community-based organizations in the marginalized communities we are seeking to serve. People and organizations working daily to transform neighborhoods are the best positioned to identify the problems and implement the solutions. Community ownership of the planning process requires funding, capacity building, and power sharing to support the residents and CBOs engaging in a full partnership with government agencies. I encourage you all to explore these three frameworks and the others linked in this presentation. I implore you all to also explore how you operationalize these frameworks as formal policies within your agencies, organizations, firms, and institutions. Next, let's discuss new systems, focusing on two which are multimodal and two complementary and intersectional systems. First up is Equiticity's work on developing community-owned neighborhood mobility hubs. Equiticity's The Go Hub, a community mobility center, is our vision for a traditional mobility hub in the North Lawndale neighborhood on the west side of Chicago, reimagined to explicitly serve Black and brown people living in a low to moderate income neighborhood and experiencing severe transportation inequities. This new vision for a mobility hub is a physical and digital space where neighborhood residents create community around mobility justice and environmental justice. This new vision for growing mobility amidst significant trauma brings hardware and software together in a protected and safe space where culture and healing are centered. The Go Hub software is the social infrastructure, such as community mobility rituals and the power building necessary to develop a neighborhood-based Racial Justice Advocacy Coalition. The GoHub hardware is the physical infrastructure, technology, and shared mobility devices necessary to grow mobility at a hyperlocal neighborhood level. The GoHub's innovative integration of software, social infrastructure, and hardware, physical infrastructure, requires a physical space to serve as a community center dedicated to increasing mobility for our members and neighborhood residents. Another system is Equiticity's Mobility Opportunities Fund. This is a financial incentives program designed to help limited income Black and brown residents purchase climate-friendly transportation, including conventional bicycles, electric cargo bicycles, and electric vehicles. Voucher programs such as this, led by governments and/or CBOs, drive adoption of conventional bikes, e-bikes, and e-cargo bikes for people who may not otherwise afford bikes and e-bikes. Equiticity, to date, has distributed about $250,000 to about 250 people to help them purchase climate-friendly transportation. Nice. Next, let's discuss two complementary and intersectional systems. First up is the new system of racially equitable traffic safety. In the U.S., Black and brown communities have deep concerns around violence. To the extent these concerns shape our transportation mode choice. We are concerned about three types of violence: interpersonal violence, vehicular violence, and police violence. Both police enforcement and automated enforcement are punitive strategies targeting already marginalized communities. Our society needs non-punitive strategies to reduce traffic violence and make our streets safer. One strategy is removing police from traffic enforcement and creating a civilian body to execute against reducing traffic violence. A second strategy is investing in re-engineering our streets to force safer driving behaviors. The third strategy is a progressive fine structure paired with restorative justice policies. The final strategy I will mention here is a comprehensive traffic violence reduction strategy, which is all parts community-owned, innovative, and asset-based. The second complementary system is closing the spatial mismatch. I suspect it is true here in Indianapolis, as it is true in many mid to large-sized cities around the U.S. There is a spatial mismatch between the job seekers and the job centers. Creating more equitable environments and transforming communities requires us to close this spatial mismatch. This may be done by helping create both social infrastructure and the physical infrastructure which supports more racially marginalized people cycling and/or using transit to get to work. This may also be done by bringing more job centers back into our cities and our neighborhoods where jobs are needed the most. Next, let's discuss a few new moves. Marginalized communities must own the planning processes impacting our neighborhoods
and our cities. We must work in full partnership with government agencies, envisioning, planning, and executing transportation plans across all modes of travel in our communities. We must be compensated for this ownership and partnership, and we must share power and decision-making. Marginalized communities require an investment in social infrastructure to help create walk and bicycle cultures in our communities. These walk and bicycle cultures and higher rates of walking and cycling in our communities will contribute to improving health, creating jobs, reducing violence, and ultimately making our neighborhoods and cities more livable for racially marginalized people. An example of this social infrastructure is Equiticity's community mobility rituals. Our community mobility rituals, what we sometimes refer to as CMRs, include community bicycle rides, neighborhood walking tours, public transit excursions, group scooter rolls, and cyclovia-style open streets festivals. We refer to these mobility events as rituals, given that they have 7 elements in common which lend themselves to being ritualistic. These elements include a schedule with rhythmic frequency, priority on socialization, focus on racialized healing, reduced barriers to participation, natural development of shared customs, and the active disruption of the status quo, and the hyperlocal collective ownership of our space at the neighborhood level. Community mobility rituals at the hyperlocal neighborhood level contribute to growing trust in neighborhoods. When trust increases in neighborhoods, perceptions of violence decrease. An expansion of the social contract and a reduction in the concerns around neighborhood violence move people to walk, bike, shop, and explore their communities. More active and hyperlocal explorations make our streets more vibrant. More vibrant streets attract increased retail, leading to greater job creation in our neighborhoods and will contribute to reducing violence in our communities. Operationalizing racial equity and mobility justice within your respective institutions come with some challenges. Let's call these equity challenges, and let's talk briefly about 3 listed here. Accelerating gentrification and displacement. New infrastructure in racially marginalized communities does have the potential of accelerating gentrification and displacement. This is especially true for large transit projects such as equitable transit-oriented development. One of the strategies for arresting gentrification and displacement is implementing policies now, several years in advance of the infrastructure landing in a neighborhood. In addition, DOTs should be working in close partnership with departments of housing and mayor's offices to develop anti-displacement policies to solve for the potential displacement by their infrastructure projects years into the future. DOTs are visioning and planning for projects that are coming in 3, 5, or 7 years. Now is the time to solve for future displacement. Lack of compensation and capacity building for CBOs, community-based organizations. Black and brown-led organizations in marginalized neighborhoods are often stretched and already at capacity. We are on the ground in neighborhoods solving for violence, food deserts, police reform, underperforming schools, healthcare disparities, high unemployment rates, and poverty. We often don't rank transportation high on our list of priorities. And we don't feel confident in our ability to move what feels like an opaque and impenetrable transportation sector and planning process. Historically, the transportation sector has done a terrible job creating space for Black and brown communities to have an active voice in shaping the transportation projects impacting our communities. Given these barriers, Black and brown-led CBOs and racially marginalized communities require funding to support their ownership and partnership. We also require capacity building to be able to better serve as transportation advocates. Urgent need for a transformative operational commitment to racial equity and mobility justice. The transportation sector must operationalize a commitment to racial equity. This operational commitment must be transformative in two ways. The commitment must transform the agency making the commitment, and the commitment must transform the people intended to benefit from the commitment. Here is a test of your agency's commitment. In the event your agency has made a commitment to racial equity and mobility justice, ask yourselves, what has changed internally at the agency? Also, ask yourself, are you comfortable? In case you are comfortable, your agency has no transformative commitment to racial equity and mobility justice, and you are not doing your job. An operational commitment to this framework completely transforms systems, structures, and institutions. And this work should be some of the hardest work we've ever done. We do not create more equitable environments because everyone in this room has a good heart. For this reason, we do not leave a commitment to racial equity, mobility justice, and environmental justice to people with good hearts. Good hearts and warm bodies come and go. Goofy smiles and awkward handshakes come and go. Shifting political winds come and go. We policy an operational commitment to mobility justice and environmental justice. We legislate an operational commitment to racial equity. This policy and legislative strategy ensures these commitments are more durable, long-lasting, and impactful. We are not of the opinion that systems, structures, and institutions which harm us have an inherent right to exist. To those which do us harm, we say, burn it down and build anew. One of my favorite people is Marlo Stanfield from HBO's The Wire. He once told somebody, you want it to be one way, but it's the other way. What happens when we turn on the power and equity moves like electricity through our homes, our streets, our neighborhoods, and our cities. Equiticity. Power plus equity is greater than. As you all leave this event today, I ask you all to do one thing for me. Turn on the power and let equity flow. Here's my contact information again. You are all welcome to get in touch with me. And a kind reminder, the link at the bottom and the QR code will take you to this presentation where you will have access to all of the links that were embedded in the presentation. We will close out with a video. Thank you all. Let's have a lively discussion.
Hi, my name is Jerry Person. I'm the Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator for DPW here in Indianapolis. We're going to do a question and answer. If you guys have questions, you should have gotten some 3x5 note cards. Go ahead and pass them to the center, and Danielle right there will go ahead and collect them. And I'd like you guys just to introduce yourselves one more time as well.
Thank you. I am Sharia Caldwell, Florida Eastside resident and also the Vice President of Communications and Engagement at Cafe, located at 38th and Post Road.
Hello everyone again, Olatunji Oboi Reed, Founding President and CEO of the Equiticity Racial Equity Movement.
Great. So that presentation was eye-opening in so many ways. There's little pieces that were almost there, and like there are places where we've had the best intentions, and it's led us in the wrong direction. I just found that so clarifying. So thank you for that. I wanted to start with a question for both of you guys. Professional engineers, planners, they don't have the best history of racial equity and mobility justice. There's a variety of levels of understanding regarding those topics. I'm curious where you guys think, how should we decide the best places to start conversations around transportation equity? Should our focus be on convincing folks that don't yet understand, working with those that come to, supporting the few that are fully bought in? Where do you think that the most important work takes place right now, and what does that work look like? So, and either of you guys can start.
Well, I think first and foremost, there has to be awareness around where a neighborhood is when it comes to transportation infrastructure and how people in the community utilize those various modes of transportation. I challenge the planners and engineers to actually ride the bus, to actually walk the streets, so they can have an understanding from the perspective of the resident or the community member who utilizes it on a daily basis. Health by Design assisted us with doing a walkability study not too long ago, and it really helped to put some things in perspective, I think, for people who usually look at maps versus actually on the ground understanding, well, yes, there's a sidewalk here, but there's no buffer. Yes, there is a bus stop here, but there's no bench, there's no seating. Yes, the bus may come every 30 minutes, but there are no shelters on the far east side. So really understanding from the perspective of the user and how they utilize that transportation, I think is the first step.
Completely agree with everything you said. What I'll add to that is for agencies, when you're ready to make a commitment to racial equity and mobility justice, don't do it alone. Don't do it by yourselves. Black and brown people have done a lot of the foundational work that I talked about. Equiticity has the racial equity statement of principle. The Untokening has the principles of mobility justice. Facilitating Power has the community, the spectrum of community engagement to ownership spectrum. I got the title wrong. So you don't have to do it alone. A lot of this groundwork has already been done. What you need to do is make a real commitment to these frameworks and these policies, and be open to this commitment, transforming your agencies. That's the hard part. That's the hard part, because it requires you to be uncomfortable. As I said, should your agency make a commitment to racial equity and you're uncomfortable, you're not doing your job and your agency has no commitment. It requires you to be uncomfortable. It requires you to do more, go further, put yourself in tough positions than you've ever done before. That's when we'll see a transformative impact.
So one of the points that you made in the presentation was about removing police as part of the enforcement and kind of creating an opportunity for restorative justice. And you know, while I was sitting there, I was thinking about what that might look like, and I was like, all right, if you run a red light, you should experience that. You know, and I thought that could be a creative way to do restorative justice. But I hear some of the things that you guys presented of, you know, engineers and planners have created the harm, and in order to repair it, they need to experience it, like you said, firsthand. They need to experience it and feel what it feels like. I am curious, like, do you have any examples that you might want to share of restorative justice in action? Did you have any experiences about that you could share?
I really appreciate the point you made, because anybody doing transportation work got to hear this point. The transportation sector is seeking to solve a problem using police enforcement that the sector created. The transportation sector is responsible for traffic violence inequitably impacting Black and brown communities. And because the sector couldn't solve it, the sector said, okay, police, come solve it for us. We call this compounding inequities. We're impacted by traffic violence, we're impacted by terrible infrastructure in our neighborhoods, and we're impacted by police enforcement, which in some cases could become violent or even deadly. So it's time for the transportation sector to solve the problem of traffic violence and not lean on punitive strategies such as police enforcement and automated enforcement.
And I'll add, when you think about traffic violence, imagine crossing 5 lanes of traffic to get to the other side of the street and receiving a ticket for jaywalking.
But the next available crosswalk is about a half a mile away. So you have the opportunity to
potentially exert yourself for walking further, being late to work, being late to school, or running the risk of jaywalking to get where you need to. The further you get from the downtown core, the longer the streets are, the further away the crosswalks are. So those things are challenges within the community, and also lead to, you know, pedestrian deaths at a higher and alarming rate as well.
I want to point to
a couple of examples. I'm sure there's restorative justice work happening in Indianapolis. It may not be with respect to transportation, however, crime and other matters. I'm sure there's some sort of restorative justice process happening here. It's certainly happening in Chicago. In the neighborhood where I'm based, North Lawndale, there's a restorative justice court that's a part of the county court system that handles, mostly low-level crimes. It's facilitated through a formal restorative justice process. Why can't we do the same with respect to traffic infractions? Why can't we help people understand how speeding and running red lights has an adverse impact on young people at the neighborhood level, or elderly people at the neighborhood level, and contributes to constricting people's mobility? So that example exists. We just need to apply it to transportation. And then there is a model that was implemented in Bogota, Colombia, where a mayor had come in. This was, I don't know, maybe a decade or so ago. A new mayor had came in. He wanted to solve for traffic violence on a major corridor in Bogota. This corridor had high levels of traffic violence, and the police were corrupt. So he had to solve for traffic violence without engaging the police. And he created some innovative strategies. He used mimes, the mimes. And when a driver did something dangerous, they would flash a red card. When a driver did something, healthy and safe, they would flash a green card. It was incredibly effective. It reduced traffic violence significantly on that corridor. So the idea that we must lean into these punitive strategies to solve traffic violence is flat out false. We need innovation, we need creativity, we need community ownership, we need restorative justice. When we bring all of those things together and more, I'm confident, and investment in infrastructure, that's number one. When we bring all of those things together, we will solve for traffic violence, and it does not have to be punitive.
Great, thank you guys. Ms. Hall, I want to start with you. So a 2022 report from the Fair Housing Center of Central Indiana showed that neighborhoods near downtown Indianapolis are experiencing signs of gentrification. There's both a real and perceived relationship between public investment into active transportation, things like the BRT and protected bike infrastructure. We have the Purple Line coming through in 2024. I'm wondering what opportunities you see to reduce displacement for low income and black and brown people living in these areas.
Thank you for that question. So I've lived on the Far East Side for 30 of my 36 years of life. And the only time that I wasn't on the Far East Side is when I was in college. And I never thought until 2 years ago that the Far East Side was in danger of being gentrified. The reason why I never thought that is because there were no major attractions that it felt like young white professionals would be interested in. So it wasn't until we saw the announcement for the Purple Line and then the demo of Oak Tree that it started to think like, okay, this could potentially happen. As an organization at CAFE, one thing that we have tried to do is create awareness. So through the announcements of various infrastructure things happening in the community, there's a lot of out-of-town investors that have been quite honest predatory.
The out-of-towners see it.
Yes.
Even if we don't, the out-of-towners see it.
Yeah. So they're calling longtime homeowners and business owners and trying to purchase property, and they're offering double and triple what the property is technically worth. So if they do sell, that's increasing property values. We want to create education and awareness around that so that people are informed about the decision that they do make if they do want to sell their property. Also, we've been working with organizations such as Intend Indiana. They are working with us through the Live Indy designation, so the Far East Side was selected for that award. and they are acquiring property as it becomes available to redevelop it into low to moderate housing. And then we are also working with programs that have been rolled out through the city, such as the Indie Rent program, as well as the Indie AMP program to assist with the refinancing for homeowners to get that lower % interest rate to be able to stay in their home even if they are behind. And then also working with various organizations that already support for our Eastside residents, either through housing opportunities such as like Pathway Resource Center. They have programs in place for seniors who are aging in place. We have Carriage House East Apartments with the Glick Foundation. So really working with organizations who are already doing the work around housing and looking at ways to make it sustainable and create that awareness to keep people in the community who want to remain. I think some of the things that we need to work on, and you mentioned this earlier, is that there has to be policies put in place 5 to 7 years. So we're already behind when it comes to that. So we have seen rent increase at an alarming rate. Literally in 2019, you can get a 2-bedroom apartment on the Far East Side for $800. Now you're looking at about $1,200, but the median income is still right around $40,000. So those are the challenges that we're currently faced with. And how do we create opportunities to minimize that rent or create some sort of funding to support those and help with rent sustainability are things that we still have to look into doing.
You said it all. The only thing I'll underscore, and I mentioned it, you mentioned it now, that Purple Line project was on the drawing board 5 years ago, 10 years ago. That's when the work should have started to arrest future displacement. The DOT should have been in partnership with the mayor's office and the Department of Housing saying, look, we got a big project coming to a neighborhood. It could potentially accelerate gentrification. Let's start putting some policies in place. So that's the key. Waiting until the infrastructure lands, the policies, even when they're aggressive, won't move fast enough to catch the displacement. We saw it in Chicago with the 606. That's an elevated trail in Chicago. Some people at the neighborhood level were telling the city and the Trust for Public Lands, this is likely going to accelerate displacement. They didn't take it seriously. Once that trail opened, displacement skyrocketed, and the policies couldn't move fast enough to stop it.
So actually, hold on to it. So with the, I want to, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
I need the back, maybe. So for the 606, and then maybe you could talk about the red line. So those are things that are now in our history. Are there things from it that you want to make sure that we do again? And then are there things that you want to make sure that we do different moving forward?
In terms of what to do different is, repeating what I've said, and that is knowing that these projects are coming years in advance, starting to put policies in place now that will arrest gentrification in the future. To your point, I find this to be true in my neighborhood, North Lawndale on the west side of Chicago. It's one of those neighborhoods people don't really see the potential for gentrification. It's not close to downtown, it's not close to the lakefront, not a lot of amenities in the neighborhood. However, there's a lot of development coming. An elevated trail is coming to my neighborhood, new housing development, new manufacturing development coming to my neighborhood. And when you start to combine all of these different things, there is some potential that even a neighborhood that doesn't seem at risk for gentrification could see it come. So I'm just repeating the importance of taking it seriously and putting in place policies now.
So one thing I will acknowledge is that Indigo heard all of the negative criticism that we gave in regards to the red line. The amount of time that it took for that development to take place, the businesses that were significantly impacted, especially the local mom and pop shops, And then just the way the infrastructure may have been developed around landscaping, accessibility, some of the left turns and things of that nature. So we have been able to benefit from the mistakes that were made with the red line. And then Indigo has been intentional about making a concerted effort to partner with organizations like Cafe, the schools, Pathway, La Plaza, a lot of the organizations that are housed on our side of town to have focus groups and listening sessions to really understand what the need is. They've also gone the extra step of doing the ride ambassadors to be able to teach folks how to utilize the bus, and then also introducing the My Key card and things of that nature. So I think it's just continuing to listen. One of the things that we're still, advocating for, and I understand that development can only go so far in the first round, is the Purple Line. It goes east and west to Post Road, and then it goes north to Lawrence. There is large density, specifically from our immigrant community at 38th and Midhofer. And currently, the Purple Line will not go down there. We will still have the regular Indigo routes, but that means you have to catch 2 buses instead of 1. And so those are some of the challenges that we're still vocal and kind of advocating for, because we know that the infrastructure development will impact along where the Purple Line is going, but then it stops abruptly. I do appreciate the partnership with the city of Lawrence, because I think that is a good pilot to see how Indigo can work with surrounding neighborhoods or suburbs that are not technically, Lawrence is still Marion County, but still it's the city of Lawrence. So looking at ways to create those partnerships with the Purple Line so that we can address those gaps. Because it goes back to your point in regards to being able to access the jobs. Greenfield has a lot of new warehouses and job opportunities that are starting at around $19 to $20 an hour, but there's no bus line to get you there. And it's literally 3 miles away from the Far East Side. So looking at ways to create those partnerships regionally, especially with those cities that touch Marion County, but haven't quite got to that transportation that's needed.
That's great.
How much time do we have?
Can we ask a question?
Like 7:30, 7:45.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And then, if anyone has questions.
Let's do 2 more, and then we'll go to crowd questions, if that sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, great. So I do want to, so we kind of looked at it from the governing body position, and then we moved into the engagement with community groups. I'd be curious to hear both of your thoughts on the current resident, right? So let's take the position that we're current residents of an area. What are some ways that current residents, renting, property owners, business owners, that they can prepare to leverage the investments that are coming to their community to combat displacement?
I really appreciate the question, because one of the responses or one of the strategies to arresting future displacement is to increase more economic opportunities for people who live in the neighborhood now. And what that does, it positions people to be able to afford, higher property values. We don't necessarily want higher property values. However, there is a benefit, especially for long-time residents who are looking for that, opportunity to, sell their home and, move down to Florida or something like that. So we understand that there's a need for that. In the event those property values go up, we want people in our neighborhoods to be able to afford the properties. We shouldn't have to decide between living in our neighborhood and not have the amenities, or the amenities coming to our neighborhood and we're not able to live there. So policies that help increase economic opportunities, like job training, like entrepreneurship, bringing more retail into the neighborhood, and looking for opportunities for people in the neighborhood to own those businesses that's operating in those retail spaces. all of that helps increase economic opportunities, which could combat displacement.
And I'll go back to another thing that you mentioned in your presentation. So the Black and Brown community-based organizations are already stretched thin. So a lot of the organizations that are within our communities that provide those trainings, those financial assisting, financial literacy programs are already stretched thin. Those are not necessarily areas of expertise, but they're areas of necessity. And they speak to basic needs, so they have to be addressed. One of the things that we really try to do is push the various opportunities for business owners or entrepreneurs to be able to take their business to the next level, either through the Black Business Chamber, the Indie Chamber, LISC. There's P30 that's in our community now, so really being able to get folks connected with programs such as that. Looking at ways to partner with like IMHP, as well as working with other CDCs to have an understanding of what programs exist and what is available to assist families if they need homeowner repair, or if they are interested in selling their home, what things that they should consider before doing so, how to manage that money once they have sold. So if, for example, because this has come up quite a few times, an investor will approach a resident and say, we'll give you $250,000 for your home. The home technically only maybe appraises for $100,000, but they've had to refinance a few times, so they actually owe more than what the home is appraising for. So you may sell it to that investor for $250,000, but you owe $200,000 on the home sale to be able to close out the loan, all capitalized interest and things like that. So being able to help people make those informed decisions, I think is really what is going to help us. And then just also being able to partner and support the businesses and the schools that are in the area so they do not close.
Great, those are awesome suggestions. And I can see how maybe doing this better in the future, we start out with those policies and plan to invest in those communities, and then prepare folks and make sure that we're relaxing zoning so that people can open up businesses wherever they think they make sense. Like it's a wave that would go in ahead of the infrastructure to the people that are there right now. So that seems really powerful. So I've got two questions on here, and I want to ask one of them, but I want maybe you guys can help me decide. There's one on engagement, one on data. Which one would you guys prefer to talk about? If you vote different ways, I'll be the tiebreaker.
It was data, what was the other
And then engagement.
Data.
Data? All right, so data analysis has become a standard part of active transportation planning. So, how can transportation agencies center equity in this stage of the planning process? Maybe another way to say it, how can data be a valuable tool for residents, and what pitfalls should we look out for if we can confine ourselves to looking at data?
Okay, well first, the information has to be available in multiple languages so that people can understand it. And it also has to make people feel comfortable in completing the questionnaire or the analysis. So for example, there was a big push for the census. And we know a great majority of our community did not complete the census because there was fear of immigration, of them having people living in their homes who shouldn't based off of criminal history, or sometimes people may live in a home that has a lease, that has a lease, that has a lease, so technically it's not in their name. So there were lots of barriers to where a lot of people didn't fill out the census. So we know that data is not accurate. So then utilizing that data to inform the decisions that are made in that community are not equitable. So I think that those are some of the pitfalls, are the challenges, but ways that we can kind of address that is through having those continued focus groups with the community and meeting them where they are, not asking them to come to us to have those questions and those facilitated conversations.
Completely agree. A few other things that come to mind, community ownership, the data collection process, the data analysis, the stories that come out of the analysis, all of that should be done in partnership with community-based organizations at the neighborhood level. The data has to be disaggregated. A key element of equity is that we're able to compare data. So it has to be disaggregated. For us, that means disaggregated by race, income, and geography. We want to be able to compare, black to white or brown to black or what have you. We want to be able to compare low to moderate income communities to middle to upper income communities. We want to be able to compare across geographies, far east side versus a different neighborhood somewhere else. So it has to be disaggregated and it has to be comparative. And then we have to pair data with lived experience. You can't just execute against the data. There's some failures in data. People not responding, or they don't trust the person collecting the data, or the institution collecting the data. So we also have to go and meet people where they are, to your point. We got to go and sit down with people, focus groups, one-on-one conversations, so that we're getting the lived experience from people, and we're able to, sort of match that with the data as well. And then the agencies can't be extractive in our neighborhoods. When you come to our neighborhoods to get data, you need to come and bring it back. You need to bring the analysis back. You need to bring the projects that you want to develop as a result of this data back to our neighborhoods. And that partnership with community-based organizations is critical, because some people, should they get an email from a DOT, it may be ignored. Should they get the same email from an organization in a neighborhood that they trust, they may complete that survey, or they may show up at that focus group.
And I'll add to that point, bringing the data back and also having early action items that are attached to that data. So you don't want to just survey for the sake of surveying, for it to be written in a plan, but no actionable items come of that, because then that doesn't help with trust. That makes people feel like you've asked me questions, but it's only for your research. It doesn't actually benefit our community.
I got one more thing.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, absolutely.
The data shouldn't end at the point where you're collecting data to inform a project. The data analysis and collection should extend to the implementation of the project, and then and also, did the project achieve what you intended? Was the goal to increase bike mode share? Was it to increase walking at the neighborhood level? Was it to reduce traffic violence in the neighborhood? That data collection should continue to determine, was the infrastructure effective? And in the event it was not, don't wash your hands and say, we tried, it didn't work. Go back and redo it. Do something different to make that infrastructure work.
Great, thank you guys. It sounds like data might be a ritual as well. So great, I do have a couple questions from the audience here. Do we also have some that we've collected, or we can go popcorn style?
Does anyone have any questions on index cards? I can collect them. Or if anyone has a question that they want to stand up and ask as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, with the historical significance of redlining and knowing that there's money already directed away from these neighborhoods that are on the brink of gentrification, how do you address the systemic inequality that goes that far back? It's obviously out of the control of the neighborhood and the control of the neighborhood before that. So how do we bridge that gap, knowing that infrastructure is already in place to redirect those funds away, and that gentrification is the only way that those funds will therefore be allocated? How do we bridge the gap in the middle where we're in a situation like I am, where the neighborhood is up and coming, but we won't get those resources and we don't have the resources to fight for them the same way. What are our steps to take in the right direction?
So maybe, I'm not sure, did everybody hear that? Okay, cool.
Policy and legislation. These are challenging solutions because, you know, establishing policy and passing legislation is not easy. However, it's the most powerful tool you have at your disposal. We need policies and legislation to direct resources. I said it in my presentation, good hearts are not good enough. We don't want to just leave these decisions to people. We want policies and legislation that direct resources. So a quick example of what that could look like. A piece of legislation requires some analysis. And the analysis informs how resources are distributed. And part of that analysis is the historical harms that our neighborhoods have experienced and we're still being impacted by. Redlining is a contributing factor to traffic violence. It's a contributing factor to interpersonal violence. It's a contributing factor to police violence. You know, redlining has continued to contribute to the inequities that we experience today. And with that analysis, there should be some real clear mathematics that help determine how resources address those historical harms and contemporary harms. Quick answer.
So I think first and foremost, like you did, continue calling it out. No matter how uncomfortable it makes people feel. The new people to the neighborhood or the old people to the neighborhood. And then also, and I know, you know, we talk about this, and I'm sure most of us in here are registered to vote. We know that the local vote impacts us more than the presidential vote. So really getting people out to vote for those who can actually enact those policies. And then organizing as a community, those block clubs, those neighborhood associations, getting to know who your city, county councilors are, being able to understand who is on the floor, who is lobbying for what. And I know that a lot of times people can't attend those meetings, but whoever the person is in the neighborhood who is retired, who needs to go and represent the community and have a list of those things that are important to the community at the forefront and be able to vocalize those. Staying very connected to what is happening. So there's always a public hearing. You'll see a sign when something new comes to a neighborhood. The moment someone in the community sees that, take a picture, research that. A lot of times you can attend those meetings and advocate for or against those. Being registered as a neighborhood association so that you can sign up to receive those letters as a community as well.
Which are required by law.
Right. So just being organized and continuing to be able to speak on it, even if it makes people uncomfortable. But it's going to be really hard for us to undo harm that we didn't do in the first place.
I think also, I want to point out that in Indianapolis also, when we've got things on the ballot that don't necessarily benefit everyone that's voting for it, if there's a good, compassionate case, Indy shows up, like they actually vote yes on things. And I think that that's something to take advantage of in some of these situations you guys are talking about. I'm going to read a question that was submitted earlier. So, Indy's active transportation, transit, and cycling groups seem fractured and isolated in silos. And I want to kind of add to that too, that I personally have seen that as things gain structure, they become more siloed. So could you guys suggest ways that things that have become siloed, you know, transit, cycling, transportation, or as groups become larger and develop silos, how they can work together better on shared goals?
There's a few things that come to mind. Respect is critical. There's a lot of assets in our neighborhoods, people, community-based organizations doing, you know, amazing work to transform our neighborhoods, architecture, parks. There's a lot of assets in our neighborhoods. The challenging part is exploring how do we leverage the assets to transform our neighborhoods. And when, you know, organizations that are not from our neighborhoods, you know, white-led organizations, bike advocacy organizations, it's all about the infrastructure. Nothing is more important than infrastructure to white bike advocate organizations. Come with a sense of willingness to learn and respect our culture, prioritize what we are explaining we need. We want to solve for violence. How is biking going to solve for violence? It will. However, should you come to our neighborhoods and say, we want more people in your neighborhood to be bike commuters, you're going to get laughed out of the neighborhood. Should you come to our neighborhood and say, there's a role for biking in solving for violence, reducing healthcare disparities, creating economic opportunities, you're going to get a conversation with people in our neighborhoods. So those silos can be broken down by respecting our neighborhoods, prioritizing our needs, and coming with a real sincerity to work in partnership.
As you speak, I hear you speaking of the social determinants of health, basically.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of tying in the work into all of the programming and infrastructure as time goes on. It's not a conversation that happens one time or for a few years and then it dies off because it's solved for one particular group. It has to be an ongoing conversation and checking in, and as you stated, also incentivizing the organizations that are working with the people in order to continue getting that feedback so that they still feel included to be at the table. Because as time progresses, the plan is over, the thing is built, sometimes people don't feel like their input is no longer needed. And then I think also making sure that people understand that people utilize transportation modes for various reasons. And usually within our community, it's rarely for fun. So it is out of necessity. If you make sure we're gonna ride a bike in a neighborhood that doesn't have bike lanes or has limited sidewalks or shoulders or things of that nature. So really understanding it from the user's perspective.
Great, guys, thank you so much. So yeah, I'm getting the, it's time to, you got one more? All right, great. So, Daniel, everybody.
So you touched upon enforcement as not being the effective choice. What we hear a lot from our active transportation advocates is a call for more enforcement. Enforcement, whether it's vehicles parked in the bike lane, ticketing or towing, or for policy and legislation that relies on enforcement. How would you go about talking to the advocates because they have good intentions until they're told that this is not the way to go about things. And then they want to proceed regardless because this is what they see as being the only way. So how do we go about talking to our advocates about seeking other forms of change?
Do you count public shame as enforcement?
So I think one good example of this was when the cultural trail was first developed and the signals for the cultural trail were put into place, but nobody really knew how to utilize those signals as a motorist. So then folks were still making those turns on their bikes because they didn't understand when to use that bike signal and when not to. And now the big fight is the don't turn on red. So everybody's angry about that, who's the driver. Really being able to educate and create awareness on both ends, I think is what's going to go a long way in helping motorists understand that cyclists are not the problem, and cyclists understand that motorists are not the problem, and figuring out true ways to really share the road. So a painted bike lane is not a true way to share the road. That's just actually a way to get a cyclist killed. Actually, you know, we need more protected bike lanes. We need more signals, and there needs to be signage that is easy to understand in all languages. I think that's going to help go a long way on both ends. And I'll let you add what you think.
Yeah. I deal with this in Chicago all the time. White bike advocates need to understand that black people are dying at the hands of the police. We are deeply over-criminalized in our neighborhoods. We're part of a coalition in Chicago called Free to Move, and that coalition recently produced some research. And the research found that the Chicago Police Department is executing an egregiously high rate of traffic stops on mostly black people. And the vast majority of those stops yield nothing. No contraband, no drugs, no gun. It doesn't even yield a ticket or an arrest. And every interaction between black and brown people and the police has the potential to go violent. We've seen that happen. And that violence, in some cases, could result in death for a black or brown person. So should white bike advocates want to work in partnership with black and brown people, you got to come to us and explore a full partnership and solutions that benefit us and don't harm us. An enforcement strategy, whether it's police or automated, are both punitive. And it's not true that that's the only way to reduce traffic violence. It's not. Infrastructure will help reduce traffic violence. Physical infrastructure, a social infrastructure will help reduce traffic violence. A restorative justice process. There's a lot of strategies that we could employ to reduce traffic violence without a punitive approach. I encourage everybody in this room, anybody who just wants infrastructure and wants enforcement to solve for traffic violence, there's other ways to achieve that objective.
Can I ask you a question? Here in Indianapolis, there is a perfect road arterial that I'm a white boy talking white infrastructure. West Washington from Victory Park all the way essentially to the airport. It's horrid, it's wretched. How do I go about bringing about worthy bicycle travel on that stretch of road?
I think it starts with the conversations with the city county councilors that sit in those particular areas, number one. And then also going to the neighborhood associations for the people that live in those communities to see if that is a need that they also have. And then trying to find a way to bridge those gaps between the local elected officials, the neighborhood associations, and even the businesses that are in the area. One thing that we lack, once we kind of get out of downtown militia or our Carmel or Fishers, are bike parking. So you don't have anywhere to even park your bike, even if you do want to ride it. But if there are more businesses and bus stops that have that available, more people are going to ride the bikes. If there's a more presence of cycling on the road, that's going to speak to more of a need to have that infrastructure developed. But you also have to look at the plans that are already put in place for West Washington as well, to see if that's something that was already included in there.
It's totally death-defying, and I'm a very seasoned cyclist. I rode 3 miles of it last week. I rode to Habitat for Restoration, and I literally and figuratively almost got killed. Very dangerous, and you'll agree with me about that, correct, Danielle?
I have definitely rode my bike down that road from Plainfield to downtown, and it was horrible.
It doesn't have to be that way, and so when you say them seeing cyclists on it, they don't. They don't see cyclists on it because it's just dangerous.
Yeah.
The road is crap, the road is full of potholes and beat to poop, it's, you know, it's horrid.
Yeah, I could just respond to that.
I'm not familiar with the racial demographics of that corridor. What I'll tell you is
There's a lot
that.
of Ethiopian, as we were talking the other day, Mexican,
Okay.
Chinese, and groceries and restaurants.
Yeah, what I'll tell you is that this is a problem in many cities. We have a corridor like that in Chicago called Stony Island. It's horrific. I would never bike on Stony Island because I care about my life. Part of what we have to do is convince people that we're able to reimagine something different. And it's also political. Stony Island is a state road. You know, working with our state DOT is a little more challenging than just working with our city DOT. However, we have to convince our people that we could imagine something different and show them what Stony Island could look like in the event we reimagined it. You know, Stony Island is a beautiful corridor with a boulevard, a linear park in the middle. You know, what could that look like with BRT and barrier protected bike lanes and, you know, this make use of the park space. Like, there's so much that we could do to achieve this objective. And now is the time. US DOT, the second round of Reconnecting Communities grants are due in, I think, about 6 weeks or so. That's an opportunity to, US DOT, you know, wants to focus on both highways and arterials. So that's an opportunity, especially should they have those racially marginalized communities being impacted. You could potentially get your city DOT or maybe state DOT to apply for that funding and use it to, you know, reimagine that corridor. That's something that we're exploring in Chicago.
I think it's just working with the local groups to be able to, as like an early action step, host, I don't know, Saturday morning bike rides. But it has to be with the people who live there. So that there can start being an increased bike activity on that particular corridor so that people are used to seeing cyclists and then they can get to that reimagining piece.
Guys, thank you so much. I hear you guys being really careful to make sure that we don't force our intentions through areas, that we make sure that it's collaborative. And I want to thank you for all the tools that you guys have presented to repair our city. I think you'll help it be both true and believed that resources and costs are distributed fairly. Thank you guys so much.
A shout out to Black Girls Do Bike. There's quite a few of my sisters in here, so I just want to say